good riddance in the past. You're in the rear view mirror. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye. 2021. Welcome a new year. Welcome more hope with a new year and more adventures. God help us. I am even doing something that is not so comfortable, which is I'm changing the background of this episode. You get so used, we are so conditioned to get so used to something that we do over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that becomes a habit that when it is time to change it, it is so difficult. I know it doesn't seem like it's a big change. It doesn't seem like it would be difficult, but it is difficult. So the fact that I'm putting myself in a different part of my apartment and I'm actually revealing some other personal things about my apartment, which have so much to do with who I am as a person, is a big thing. I don't know if the TV is going to be something that will distract. I'm trying to see if I can still commit and focus, having the background and the scenes from the TV flicker in the back of my head, which of course I see them as I'm watching myself on the screen. If you're wondering, I'm going to have to be even more honest and more truthful about the podcast. Some things that I had not divulged before. If you were attentive and observant, you would have seen that I was a little bit more hiding myself. Usually I sit myself from here up where you can only get to see the frame that I feel comfortable with because I have gained weight. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there who have gained some weight during the pandemic. I have gained a lot of weight during the pandemic and it has been really scary. I used to be someone who was able to watch my weight. I used to be someone who was able to eat just as much as I needed and not more. And lately, for the last 2 years, I think having to do with the fear of getting sick from coronavirus, my eating turned into emotional eating. So I gained a lot of weight. The machine is right there, the treadmill, the running machine, right next to the angel Gabriel, which for so many years I have had in my apartment, always thinking that it was the archangel Michael, which my name was named for. I then, a couple of months ago, I believe, I saw a picture on the internet and I realized that that is probably a wrong assumption on my part. So I realized that this is, I believe, Saint Gabriel, not Archangel Michael. I am doing my first episode of Hey Stella. I'm doing my first episode of Hey Stella right now of the year 2022. I cannot believe that it's actually 2022. And I'm wishing everybody a joyful, prosperous, healthy, and hopeful 2022, as we all need that so much. What I wanted to start with, having gotten the feedback from my sweet Jeremy, who is the one that is very truthful and he has feedback and creative criticism of how to improve the podcast. He thinks that I should focus more on details of what I am talking about in the episodes. In so many ways, I don't do that because I assume that everybody understands what I'm talking about, forgetting that there's not a lot of people in the world who have been privileged and lucky with a lot of work to be participants for 25 years almost in one of the most unique places for actors and artists in the world, which is the actor studio. And you know that I talk about it all the time. I am proud to say that I'm a member of it. But I would like to go back and make the link more in detail of how I consider the technique, the acting technique, the method acting technique in the way that I understand it. Again, this is my opinion, this is my understanding of it, my perception of it, has so much to do with everything that's going on in the world. And it is applied consciously or subconsciously in so many other professions. Acting training requires of us actors and of us acting coaches who work with actors to train in so many different psychological ways. And what do I mean by that? Stanislavsky, which is the father of the system, which later became known, the method, when it was taken over by Strasberg and was adapted by Strasberg for the American actor. Stanislavsky, back in Russia 100 and some years ago, was the first one to develop a training, a manual with tools and exercises that he considered were going to be very helpful for the actors in their search to portray and to play the many lives of different characters that actors are asked to play during their one lifetime. The way that he came up with a system was not an overnight, oh, I'm going to write something, a manual that's going to do that and it's going to give tools to the actors. Himself as an actor, as a director, as a theater person, was an observer for so many years, going to different shows on stage, watching a lot of actors performance after performance after performance. He took notes to understand what was it that worked for one performance with the same actor doing the same play, but then the next performance did not work. And he was trying to fill in the gap, and he was asking questions, and he was trying to come up with an understanding that was going then to be substantial writing material that he could put down for the first time in a book, on paper, and present to actors to have a map of how they should go about portraying real human behavior, real human comportment that they will bring to the characters that they play. And that took over years. Putting himself in the practice of being the actor in the shoes of the actors. It was him being a director, understanding that part from the outside. It was him being the director of the Moscow Art Theater. And after many, many years, he felt ready to write down a manual that he knew was going to be better than not having a manual, which was the case before he came up with one for actors, in trying to help actors to portray humanity as it should be portrayed and not imitated or not. Oh, shoot, I'm not coming up with words, but that's okay. I have to focus. I have to relax. It's one of the exercises that he came up with. One of the tools was the relaxation and the trying to not play to the audience, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to play to the audience, which I know is something that I have to kind of relax myself back from. So I have to take my ownership of my instrument, my body, my senses, my heart, my voice, and everything that has to do with me, the soul, exercises of the soul. I don't feel like I'm doing a great job right now. And I always have that voice in the back of my head that's telling me that. So I have to take a little bit of a step backwards and give myself the chance to not feel like I have to deliver. Don't try to impress, and you will impress by being yourself and by setting yourself a goal. I just want to read something to you because he based some of the system that he wrote, he based some of the discovery of the understanding of the human behavior and how he was then translating it for the actors in the training on a psychologist. Pavlov's dog study and Pavlovian conditioning was pretty much at the base of Stanislavsky's understanding of how he should approach acting and the training of the actor. Like many great scientific advances, Pavlovian conditioning, classical conditioning, was discovered accidentally. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, 1849 to 1936, was a physiologist and a psychologist. During the 1890s, and that was the same time that Stanislavsky lived, during the 1890s, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was researching salivation in dogs in response to being fed. He inserted a small test tube into the cheek of each dog to measure saliva when the dogs were fed with a powder made from meat. Pavlov predicted the dogs would salivate in response to the food placed in front of them, but he noticed that his dogs would begin to salivate whenever they heard the footsteps of his assistant who was bringing them the food. When Pavlov discovered that any object or event which the dogs learned to associate with food, such as the lab assistant, would trigger the same response, he realized that he had made an important scientific discovery. Pavlov started from the idea that there are some things that a dog does not need to learn. For example, dogs don't learn to salivate whenever they see food. This reflex is hardwired into the dog. In behaviorist terms, food is an unconditioned stimulus and salivation is an unconditioned response. Next, Pavlov began the conditioning procedure whereby the clicking metronome was introduced just before he gave food to his dogs. After a number of repeat trials of this procedure, he presented the metronome on its own. As you might expect, the sound of the clicking metronome on its own now caused an increase in salivation. So the dog had learned an association between the metronome and the food, and a new behavior had been learned. Because this response was learned or conditioned, it is called conditioned response and also known as a Pavlovian response. Pavlov found that for associations to be made, the two stimuli had to be presented close together in time, such as a bell. He called this law of temporal contiguity. If the time between the conditioned stimulus, bell, and unconditioned stimulus, food, is too great, then learning will not occur. Pavlov showed that dogs could be conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell if that sound was repeatedly presented at the same time that they were given food. First, the dogs were presented with the food, they salivated. Then Pavlov sounded a bell, neutral stimulus, before giving the food. After a few pairings, the dog salivated when they heard the bell, even when no food was given. The bell had become the conditioned stimulus and salivation had become the conditioned response. The dogs had learned to associate the bell with the food and the sound of the bell, and salivation was triggered by the sound of the bell. Pavlov showed that classical conditioning leads to learning by association. That's pretty much the summary of it. Why am I talking about Pavlov's conditioning of the dogs? Because it is known that Stanislavsky based his understanding of what the training for the actor should be on this very particular experiment of Pavlov and his dogs. What do I mean by that? There's a misunderstanding that method actor is an actor who in many circumstances will do something that is unkind to himself or herself, or is dangerous, or is not healthy, because it is misunderstood to be that the actor is doing something and going back into different experience of his or her life, personal life, which some people believe that it is not healthy for anybody to do. And I am saying that it's exactly the opposite. If method acting is understood correctly, then you will see what was I saying? Oh my God, I'm using too many words right now. And I'm like, I feel like I'm not doing the right explanation. I'm complicating everything. But what I wanted to say is that if understood correctly, the way that I feel that I've understood it, I'm really grateful that I've had so many years and I have so many years to be able to learn from grades at the Actor Studio and understand method as it should be understood. And I teach it as it should be taught. I consider it to be the opposite of what those people who misunderstand it say. Those people who say that it's a dangerous method to take on because it taps into the personal experiences of the actors and it brings them to places which may be dark in that actor's life. I say it's giving those actors the ownership. It's giving those actors the manual, the tools that Stanislavsky came up with to have them in order for the actor to be able to balance and to understand how to be the masters of their own instrument by having this manual that they can follow, by having the blueprint that's going to keep them safe within the imaginary circumstances. The imaginary circumstances of a play or of a film are the safety net because they are imaginary circumstances. As long as you, the actor, are aware of that, okay, I'm just going to take a moment. That's okay. You think? It's very difficult because I never went so far. The misunderstanding of the actors by people who don't know method is really wrong. When I believe that what Stanislavsky came up with and then what Strasberg then adapted for the American actor is so much more of a safety guard and safety net for the actor. So it's completely the opposite of saying it's a dangerous method. A dangerous method is when you have no tools in knowing how to navigate your instrument. No, but imagine if you have a pilot, honey, and somebody says, oh, you're a talented pilot because he's done some flying lessons, but he doesn't have any kind of manual that he's going to base his training on. Nobody's gonna want to let him fly. He will be the first one that's gonna feel like he's a danger to himself. So the same with actors. The method is what creates that safety within the imaginary givings. Oh my God. I think I just found the most clear definition of the Stanislavsky system. Stanislavsky system is a systematic approach to training actors that the Russian theater practitioner Konstantin Stanislavsky developed in the first half of the 20th century. His system cultivates what he calls the art of experiencing. I didn't even know that. I thought the art of experiences became known at the Actor Studio, but he called it that, with which he contrasts the art of representation. It mobilizes the actor's conscious thought and will in order to activate other, less controllable psychological processes, such as emotional experience and subconscious behavior, sympathetically and indirectly. In rehearsal, the actor searches for inner motives to justify action and the definition of what the character seeks to achieve at any given moment, a task. Throughout his career, Stanislavsky subjected his acting and directing to a rigorous process of artistic self-analysis and reflection. Stanislavsky eventually came to organize his techniques into a coherent, systematic methodology, system method. The reason why I wanted to bring all this in more of a detailed understanding is because I never really explained the psychology behind the method. I kind of was very general in the way that I talked about it. So many times I say I'm not a psychologist by trade. I don't have a diploma. So those people, those actors, when they come to me to work with an acting coach, they say acting is also a healing process. It helps you heal. I'd never dare to say that it's a healing process because I don't want them to confuse an acting coach with a psychiatrist. You go see a psychiatrist. You don't depend on an acting coach to resolve your psychological issues. But psychology, as an acting coach, as an actor, you must be a psychologist, one without a diploma, which does not put the pressure or the expectations on myself to solve issues that I am not an expert in solving. Going back to the Pavlov's conditioning experiment, Stanislavsky and then Strasberg method, system, and the method based a lot of the sensory work, the use of the senses of the actor to produce emotional response. What do I mean by that? Going back to what I was saying about the dogs being able to respond, having done the experiment where the bell was rang and then they approached the bell and they were given food, they started to salivate. After doing it over and over and over, repetition, rehearsal, doing it over and over again, the sound of the bell in calling the dogs to be fed, even though there was no food that was waiting for them, without it, the dogs were salivating. The sensory work in the method is the foundation of the method, without which the house of the method could not stand on. That foundation, the sensory work, is asking the actors to use their sensory apparatus, to use their senses when they are acting in the given circumstances. So they are being asked to experience that which they are living, even though it is imaginary circumstances in a play or in a film, but they must experience it. They must not pretend to experience it. And how do you experience it? With using the senses. To demonstrate something that's very similar to what I was talking about in the Pavlov's experiment, I would be sitting here in front of you. Some of you are going to be able to see this because I'm usually putting it on YouTube. Some are just going to hear it as a podcast. But if I were to use the sense of hearing, let's just use the sense of hearing because it was the same use of the bell ringing for the dogs. If I were to take a moment and to relax and allow myself, my instrument of an actor, to be completely open, decide that I want to go for an emotion. If I were on stage right now and that particular moment expects of me to go for an emotion, to produce of an emotion because the character would have an emotion at this time. The thought to have an emotion is going to completely numb you from being able to have an emotion. It's going to actually paralyze you. It's going to make you completely be numb and still and petrified because the expectation that you put on yourself to have an emotion is too much. Therefore, you're going to be like tense, stop, there's no emotion. So if you go to what Stanislavsky and Strasberg are talking about, which is allow the senses to be involved in the experience, don't think of the emotion, and the emotion will come. I'm sitting here, I'm letting myself be relaxed, and I am going to give myself a second to allow a sound from my past to ring into my ears right now. I'm allowing the sensory of the hearing, even though I know where I am as an actor right now. I'm in my house. I am in the year 2022. You must never lose track of that, as some people misunderstand that you must as a method actor, which is bullshit. You know where you are, but then you give yourself the opportunity to allow yourself and your instrument to recall a sound from your personal life. I'm closing my eyes because maybe that will make it be available to me a little bit sooner, just because I don't want to keep everybody waiting here for a long time. There are two sounds that are coming to me, two very distinguished sounds from two different people. A singing sound, and the next one is someone's voice from a different person of great meaning to me in my life. So I'm just going to take a few minutes without describing it to give myself that opportunity to actually experience it in the present moment, bring it from the past and experience it in the present moment. don't push for the emotion, because we tend to push for the emotion because we want to impress the audience, and we want to tell the audience that we are great enough to be able to produce emotion. And when you do that, it's not going to work. It's actually going to do the opposite. Just leave yourself alone and just listen to the one sound. Okay, so I haven't done this in a long time, and I haven't practiced in the way that it was described with those dogs and the experiment, that it's done over and over and over and over again, and then you don't let a lot of time go by before you do it again, because it's not going to work. The same way the actor is required to have training, and that training is required to happen during their entire lifetimes. It's not just, oh, I'm going to do training and I'm just going to work on the character, and then in between works I'm not going to do the training. You have to keep your training, and you have to keep rehearsing, and you have to tune your instrument, and your sensory work has to be done in between jobs over and over again. So those actors out there who think that they go to a college for 4 years and they've gotten a degree in acting and they can stop now acting because they know how to do it, is just wrong, wrong, wrong. Because as you see with me, I'm having a hard time being able to have a response because I'm not acting as much, because my main job is that of an acting coach. So I'm going to try again. I'm going to try a different sound and see if maybe those two did not work, but now I'm going to try a different sound. Do you see how the trying, and I say the trying is already to win, the winning, because that is what acting requires of you. The acting doesn't require of you to win something, but acting requires of you to not lose hope and to have the willingness to keep trying. So I'm going to try one more time. And now I have a different sound that I'm going to use. I gave myself the opportunity to actually relax my body more than I did before. Maybe I have to lean back a little bit so I'm more relaxed in my body. So the tension is not going to hold me from having the sound be very vivid in my ears right now. Yeah. Yeah. So what I found is that by not giving up and by continuing to try and not giving up because the first two sounds did not work, I found the third one to work. So now that I have that in my repertoire, I'm going to mark that in my memory, or I'm even going to take a notebook and I'm going to write it down just to know that I have discovered something which was not in my first trial or in my second one, but in my third one. So I'm going to write that down and I'm going to see if it's going to, I'm going to see, I love this kid. I'm going to see if it's going to work the next time that I have to actually do it. So I'm going to try it even next episode to see if it is still going to be as powerful as it was this time. But I want you guys to know that it wasn't the first or the second one that I thought was going to work. So when something doesn't work the first time, the second, you go for a third one or you go for a fourth one. This is the sensory work. This is the sensory work. This is what method acting is based on. It is such a powerful tool, and it gives the actor the opposite of what the misunderstanding is. Again, I just want to say that. I want to clarify it. Doing damage to your emotional, mental, physical instrument, then you must stop. Go try every other method that you can think of. And then from trying all of these different techniques, you choose what works from each individual one and you bring it to your work. That's what it's about. Yeah, that was very invigorating. It goes against being damaging. That was very invigorating because having been in this business for so many years, even though that sound took me to an emotional place and to a place of a sound coming from a person that is no longer in my life right now, as sad as that is, that that person is gone, but the fact that I know that I am holding that person alive in my soul and in my heart by allowing myself to bring those experiences into my present for the purpose of working on a character and bringing that character to life is such a gift to the actor. And that means that that person is still alive in our hearts. That person is still alive in my heart, if that makes sense. So it was the sound of their voice calling my name. It was a person dear to me that was part of my childhood. And it was that person calling my name as a little girl. But I gave that away. She was calling my name in a way that today very rarely does anybody say my name in that way. That's what triggered emotion out of me. The acting training, it would be sufficient enough for detectives and for other people who are working in these other professions. They have the responsibility to assess a situation. If you are to use the technique of the actors, you would have been able to see the truth. Stanislavsky and his system has 7 questions, which are so important. The 7 questions that he has come up with are so informative to an actor in trying to find out about the characters that they are playing. And those questions are those 7 questions, which are as important as the sensory work, which is, again, the foundation of the house. This is analysis of the script. This is analysis of the character in trying to figure out details about the character and have an opportunity as the actor to portray that character as a 3-dimensional human being, not just as a board, not just as a superficial 1-dimension character. Those important questions are, and the episode that's going to happen next week is going to be paying much more attention to the first question. But for now, the first one is, who am I? Start with the basics and then fill in the gaps with your imagination. The second one, where am I? The third one, what time is it? The fourth one, what do I want? The fifth one, why do I want it? The sixth one, how will I get what I want? And the seventh one, what must I overcome to get what I want? These are brilliant questions that I am sure, if used in any other profession in order to try to figure out anyone that you're trying to figure out, by really, really focusing on the 7 questions, will give you the results in a very specific and very detailed way about the person that you are inquiring about. So the next week, we're going to focus on the first one, which is, who am I? Dig deep into that question of who you are as a person. And then by using the imagination, build on the personal and the truth of who you are as a person. The merging and the mixture of the personal and the imagination coming together all the time has to be always acknowledged by the actor. When the time comes and you don't make the distinction between the reality and the imagination, then something is wrong. Watching out there and what's happening with the pandemic, my God, I hope that this year is going to bring this pandemic crisis down and we can all be going back to having empathy for one another and not out of fear be mean and unkind, scared to actually care about other people, because that's what I feel is happening right now. Those people in today's reality who are not accepting the fact that there is a pandemic and they are in denial. They are in denial of the personal. They are in denial of the what is that every actor has to start with. You have to pay tribute and you have to understand science as is, the same way that I have to understand, if I were to play a character right now, that I am not the character. People ask, but do you become the character? You don't become the character. You start with admission to what and who you are in a way that you discover yourself much more so than any other person has to in their everyday life. As actors, we have to tap into ourselves and all of the personalities that we have. those kind personalities, those nice personalities, those not so nice personalities. We have to admit to all of them, because we need to then tap and then bring out the personalities that are being called for to the character that you are portraying. So the reality, the truth of what is being truthful and being real for actors is the principal goal. So it's not pretend acting, as so many people who are given credentials of expertise that they know about actors and acting, who say, oh, but you had to play such a different character, didn't you? There was an interview that I actually saw with Sharon Stone. I think it was about a book that she wrote. And there was this interview and she did on MSNBC with Ari, one of the journalists, Ari, I'm going to put his name down because now I don't remember his last name. And, he was there asking her questions about her life. And as soon as he came to the business of acting, and he said, oh, you have to play a different character. That's not you. And Sharon Stone didn't even bother to correct him. Correct him. Say, no, dude, you are misunderstanding. Don't ask a stupid question. Ari, stay with your political understanding of things. Don't go into acting if you don't know that. But they don't know, and they're like so living in that question as if he was asking the most important and the most perfect acting question. I'm like, dude, no, that's not correct. So actors have to be more realistic and more understanding of what's happening before they can allow the imagination to come on. Because if you tap into the imagination without being grounded in the reality of what is, that's not called acting. That means that you have some sort of a mental illness that doctors have to take care of, and you are in need of a doctor, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you need the care of the scientists, the care of the doctors who know how to help you with that, who know how to treat it. But what is happening in the world right now? Imagination, alternate reality has become the substitution to the truth and to reality. That's when everything kind of becomes blurry. That's when people start to not be grounded. That's when people start to not have something that they can depend on. That's when fear comes in. That's when all the crazy happens, I just hope that the opportunity for people to understand that acting requires for us to be so much more real and truthful than any other professionals out there will become something that people will learn eventually. And yes, so this was the first episode of 2022. I'm so glad that I was able to change my background and I was able to talk a little bit about my machine, and the fact that I have to lose weight is what I started with. And I promise I am going to keep you informed about how I do with the loss of weight, because now I am not denying it any longer. This year, I'm not denying it. I'm not going to hide from it, even though I did kind of, especially I'm just putting a little bit more out there of it. So I'm still not 100% very free in discussing it, because I always looked a certain way, and now I feel like I look differently, completely differently. And I'm kind of scared to show myself, because I have the impression that people are not going to like what they're saying, which is, yeah, that's what's going through my head right now. But this is me right now. That's my machine. This is another background for my apartment. And this is me talking about my weight. And yes, even though I have this on, but I was able to get up and say, yes, I need to lose weight. And there's the machine, and I'm going to do it. I promise. Whew, I feel so much better when I'm sitting like this, and I feel like I look the way that I want people to see me look. I want to say thank you so much. I'm so glad to do this again. I've missed it for the last 2 weeks during the holidays, and I wish everybody a happy, healthy 2022. I hope that, again, like I said before, we're going to try to be kinder to each other and just be kind to ourselves. Being kind to yourself and celebrate yourself will make you then be able to do the same thing for others. Thank you so much. Mwah.